to.
All right, well, thank you to all of you for coming out on a rainy day. I live in Falmouth, so I actually enjoy coming out here to Eastham. It's nice and quiet, but it's a lot nicer when the sun's out, so. It's nice that it joined us. So today I'm talking about, soil and as a home gardener, what do you need to know about soil? What can you do to help your soil? Oh. Said this didn't work. There we go. First, I want to talk a little bit about the Master Garden Program, because I'm here as a part of our Speakers Bureau. It's a nonprofit volunteer program. Our motto is helping others learn to grow. And so the Speakers Bureau addresses that, right? We have people who come and talk about different topics. And really what we try to do is give you science-based information, right? There's a lot of information about gardening that's folklore. There's a lot of commercial websites that have gardening information, and some of it's probably good and some of it's not, but we only deal with science-based information. In order to become a master gardener, we're trained by Russ Norton at the Cooperative Extension. During the winter of our beginning, we do 20 or 30 hours in the classroom. We spend about 40 hours over the summer in the horticulture clinic, which I'll talk about in a minute. After that, we have to do a minimum of 20 years, which for many of us, 20 hours. Which for most of us is not hard, because there's so many great things our organization does that are fun to be involved in. And we do a certain amount of continuing education for ourselves each year. There are a variety of things we do. We have a plant sale, which is a long ways away from Eastham, in the county fairgrounds in Falmouth, at the weekend before Memorial Day every year. But it's mostly plants that have been, in the yards of master gardeners and dug up and prepared for the sale. We have symposiums in the fall and spring that are open to the public. We run backyard horticulture classes, one in Barnstable and one in Harwich. They typically run from January or February through March. And they meet once a week for several hours, and usually 2 or 3 different master gardeners talk. So that's a really nice thing. We're involved in the Hydrangea Festival. The horticulture clinic is, I'm going to pass these cards out while I talk about them. The horticulture clinic is in Bass River, where the Cooperative Extension headquarters are. And that is a place that you can call, email, or visit with any gardening questions you have. It's open from March through November, and we're thinking about extending the months that it's open. But any question you have about anything to do with gardening, you can call there, email there, drop in, and there are master gardeners on call to help you. And that's everything we do is free to the public. I'm here as part of the Speakers Bureau, and we're expanding our outreach. There now is outreach at the Eastham Library once a week, and I can't tell you exactly what day that is. It's Wednesdays. Okay, great. And same thing, we don't have quite the resources that we do at the Hort Clinic, but for a lot of questions, you can go to the library and get them answered. And if they can't answer them, they'll refer them to the clinic. We also do that at the Falmouth Library, at the Bass River Farmers Market, and some other farmers markets. We have a demonstration garden at the fairgrounds in Falmouth, which again is a long ways from you, but once a month we have evening programs there. You get a tour of the gardens, and you get presentations on different subjects. And we give college scholarships. The little cards I just passed out to you are like this on one side, the white side, and there's a green side. And the white side has the information for the horticulture clinic and the website address and the phone number. And the green side has the web address for the Master Gardener website, which that's the public facing website. It tells you about all these events and when they occur and how to sign up for them and so forth. Okay, so today I'm talking about soil, and not necessarily in this order. What I hope to cover is the functions of soil, composition of healthy soil, what are soils on the Cape are like and why they're like that, about soil testing, how do you go about that, what you do with the information, and how to best improve your soil and keep it healthy, and plenty of time for questions and answers. So why is soil important? Well, it anchors and supports the plant, right? It has to be strong enough to do that. It allows water and air to get down to the roots. Roots are just like other living things. They need oxygen, right? They need water to take into the plant. And the soil provides the nutrients for growth. People and other animals eat to get our nutrients, right? We take things in, but plants get all their nutrients from the soil. They get carbon from the air through carbon dioxide, but everything else they need has to come from the soil. So if you think about it, soil is where your plant lives and what it eats. So it really is, the basis of plant life. And if you want to have healthy plants, we really need to have healthy soil. So what's soil made of? The basis of soil is mineral particles. Basically what I mean are ground up rocks, right? That forms the majority of the substance of your soil. And when you look at particles that are in soil, there are different sizes and shapes and so forth. Geologists categorize them by size, but basically what you have, the largest particles are sand. You know what sand's like, you see when you go to the beach. The smallest are clay, which are really microscopic. You can't see an individual clay particle without a microscope. And silt is in between. The sand particles tend to be sort of irregularly shaped and don't fit together perfectly. Clay particles are like little plates and they actually fit together quite well. Silt is in between. Silt has rounded particles, but they're rounded more evenly than with sand. So if we take a closer look, our sand is mostly quartz and feldspar because that's what granite is made of. So when the rocks are weathered and they break up, that's what we're left with. They're the hardest minerals. Sand helps the soil be porous. Remember, one of those important things is that air has to get to the roots and water has to get to the roots. And because those sand particles are big and they don't fit tightly together, there are a lot of spaces between them. And so water can filter down and air can filter down. The problem is what happens when you pour water in sand. It keeps going, right? It doesn't retain the water. And it's chemically, it's not active at all. So it doesn't grab any of the nutrients. So the best thing about the sand is that it provides that porosity. Clay, as I said, is made up of microscopic particles, and if you ever put your hand in some dry clay, it's basically like powder. You don't feel any texture to it. So this is like a picture of clay that you see maybe through an electron microscope. You see something that's really tiny. It's magnified 1,000 times. But the particles are flat and they pack together. So kind of the opposite of sand, right? Water can't get through, air can't get through. So if you have a lot of clay in your soil, it tends to have very poor drainage. It holds onto the water really well, but it won't let it pass through. The other thing about clay is that it can be compacted. If it's wet and you press it together, it can stay like that and it can really form a barrier, which is why we make pots out of it that last a couple thousand years, right? A good thing about clay is that it's chemically very active. Those flat surfaces that have a lot of positive and negative charges on them, so they can grab onto nutrients and pull them into the soil. Loam is an ideal base for soil, and what it is an even mixture of sand, silt, and clay, or approximately even. That way you get the qualities of each of those mineral sizes. very few of our natural soils on Cape Cod are loamy. Most Cape soils are sandy, right? Sandy with or without rocks, kind of depending on where you are, right? A few areas have clay soil. Does anyone in this area have clay soil? Do you know?
There is a clay base, but you gotta dig down.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's silvery, this like silvery bands that are clay-like.
Interesting. Wow.
And I've heard that southeast town is where there is like.
There are pockets.
Yeah.
There are some areas where you know there's gonna be clay, and there are other areas that are pockets. I know I have very sandy soil, but I have a master gardener friend up the street who has a clay pocket. It's a little bit random. Oh, and here's what I meant to show you. So if loam soil looks like that, it's dark, it's got a nice silky texture to it. Sandy soil tends to be a little bit more yellow in color, and it's very grainy. You can feel the texture. Clay soil looks like that, especially if it's been wet and then it's been broken up. It has hard clumps that you have to break apart. One way to test it, which is simple, there are all kinds of complicated things you can do and figure out percents of each, but sandy soil, basically, if it's wet and you squeeze it in your hand and you open your hand, it's gonna fall back apart. Clay soil, if you do that, you squeeze it when it's wet and you open your hand, it's gonna stay that shape forever until you pull it apart. Loam will hold its shape, but if you poke it, it'll fall apart. So that's what you're aiming for with your soil, that it's got enough to it that it'll stay together when you squeeze it, but if you poke it, it's gonna fall apart. And that shows you that it has a quality of loam, and it's got enough porosity and enough water holding capacity that it's good soil. So what else is in soil? What we've been talking about is that pink area where it says mineral particles. That's the bulk of your soil. But because they don't fit together perfectly, between those mineral particles, about half of the volume of your soil is actually air and water. And that's important because they have to be there. The plants need them. The other 5%, or approximately 5%, is organic matter. And this is really what makes your soil alive and makes it good for plants. It's a very small component of soil, but it's an essential one. By organic matter, what do we mean? Humus is not that stuff we put on pita bread. It's dead material, dead plants and so forth that's partly decomposed. There are roots, in between the particles, and they're organisms. They're big organisms like earthworms, and they're tiny little microbes. So let's talk about that component a little bit. Organic matter in soil, it improves water retention in sandy soil. It improves nutrient retention in sandy soil because it also has charges that can grab onto the nutrients. Interestingly, if you put it in clay soil, it improves the drainage in clay soil. And it helps form something called aggregates. And what that does is give soil what we call tilth. It makes sort of microscopic clumps, which are places where the microbes like to live. And it enhances the soil, at least from the point of view of the plants. And because of that, it supports the microbes. It gives them the organic matter as a food source for them. And it also is a place where they can live. They have to attach to a surface. So organic matter is really essential. And as I said, it's kind of an interaction between the microbes and the organic matter. The microbes do a lot of things. They decompose the organic matter, and by doing that, they release nutrients that are available then to the plants. Without the microbes, the nutrients wouldn't be made available. And without the organic matter, the microbes wouldn't be there to do that. I know this is kind of a complicated diagram, but if it gets the point across that the microbes do a lot in the soil, that's good. They form aggregates, like I mentioned. They release chemicals that can help plants fight disease, that can help plants grow. And there are symbiotic relationships, like you've probably heard of mycorrhizae, fungal organisms that live in the soil and break down organic matter and feed the plants because they live in association with their roots. So, because it improves the water holding capacity of sandy soil and it improves the porosity of clay soil, organic matter actually improves all soil types. So you can't, if you have sandy soil, you might think, well, I could add some clay and that would make it better. That's not really practical. The amount of clay you'd have to add would be so great that it just doesn't work. And the same if you have sandy, clay soil, you can't really add enough sand to make it loamy. So the best thing to do to any soil to change the texture somewhat and to enhance that living part of the soil is to add organic matter. So what do we mean by organic matter? Well, the best thing is probably compost. How many people here make their own compost? Oh, great. Okay. So you've got a ready source of some compost. If you don't make it, you can buy it. You know, it depends on what makes sense to you, but that's probably the best thing because compost is typically made from a lot of different ingredients. And so it's got a lot of nutrients in it that have come from different sources. And that feeds that organic matter section of the soil. You can use shredded leaves. What I like to do is put my leaves in a pile and just run the mower over them with the bag on it, and you get a lot of shredded little leaves. You can put that in your compost if you compost, but if you leave a pile of chopped up leaves for a year or so, it's gonna turn into something great to put in your garden. Chopped straw is good. Composted manure is good, not new manure, because that tends to be very hot and that can burn your plants. A lot of people use cover crops now. You can buy cover crops. What that means is to plant a crop in the early fall, let it grow. Some will grow over the winter, and in that case, you have to till them in the spring. Others will be killed by the winter weather, but you still get, you've used the soil to produce some new organic matter, and usually the things you grow are like peas or something similar, which takes some nitrogen and makes it available to the soil. We don't recommend using peat moss anymore because it comes from these peat bogs in Canada that took thousands of years to form, and it's not sustainable. It's not renewable. Compost tea can be a good thing if you make it properly and you use it at the right time. It's a little, you kind of have to know when to stop aerating it and when to use it. But if it's good compost tea, it can be very good. Has everyone heard of biochar? Yeah, I've been reading about it. And the research it's not enough information about it yet. It might be good. I know some people swear by it, but in terms of the research that's been done, it's kind of mixed. But what I like to say is, if you want to try something, as gardeners, we're all kind of experimental scientists. So if you want to try something and see how it works, it's worth trying. Okay, let's back up a little bit and talk about our soils on Cape Cod and why they're like they are. So most people have heard that the Cape was formed by glaciers. And that was about 20,000 years ago. And what happened was when the glaciers came down from the north, they pushed along anything that they flowed over, rocks, soil, organic stuff in there too. And the glaciers got as far as Cape Cod, and then they started melting. So then they melted backwards up north. But what they left was something like this. This is a current day picture from Iceland, I think, or up that way. Was this big heap of glacial debris. And that was, if you look at the map, the peak of that glacial debris was where that pink area is. And as the glaciers melted, water flowed over that big pile of debris and carried particles away. but it can't, water can't, for example, pick up boulders, which is why if you're on this pink part of the Cape, that's where all the highest elevations are. This is under Route 6, right, there through Barnstable. You get, everybody's yard, these big boulders. If you're a gardener, you plant around them or you figure out what to do. The same is true down here. If you live here or out in this part of the Cape, that original debris was actually out here and it's all been eroded away. But the farther the water flowed from that, it's called a moraine, the smaller particles get brought with it. So I live, for example, in the upper part of this red area, and I can't put a shovel in the ground without pulling out a fist-sized rock. If they were worth something, I would be a millionaire, but, I mean, every rock about that size. Down here, closer to Vineyard Sound, if you dig into what's below the soil, it's fine sand, no rocks at all. So we were given a starting point for our soil that was varied. So you can go a short distance on the Cape and you have quite different soil base. The blue areas, and some of those other areas where it's brown and so forth, are clay. That has to do with the glacier and how there was a glacial lake in Cape Cod Bay and tiny little particles were falling out of the clay particles. So you can go a short distance on Cape Cod and the soil can be quite different. So people first came about 10,000 years ago, and the indigenous people didn't have a huge impact on the land. They altered a few things, but not much. But as Europeans came, the most significant change, probably in terms of the soil, was cutting all the forests. So Cape Cod, like all of New England, was completely forested when the Europeans came, and they cut trees to build ships, build houses, keep warm in the winter, run the salt works, all kinds of things. And this picture I got from Sturgis Library. I'm not sure of the exact date, but by about 1850, the Cape was pretty much clear of trees. You'll appreciate this because there's a book titled Cape Cod by Henry David Thoreau. He made 3 different trips here in around 1850. And there's a chapter called The Plains of Eastham. And some of you read that? Yeah, he talks about how treeless it is and how you can see across the land and how the wind blows across the land. He talks about the soil looking like yellow cornmeal. He did not paint a very flattering picture, but the notable thing is that he was not impressed with the soil and the trees were all gone. So when you have a forest and you cut it down, you're suddenly exposing soil and all the organic matter that's fallen on top of it in the forms of leaves to the sun. So it dries out. And in a windy place like Cape Cod with no trees in the way, that the wind's going to blow, and probably a lot of the top of the soil just blew away. There were also some practices that, didn't help that, like using land for grazing. So if you have hoofs chopping up the soil and, tilling it up, essentially, that's just more of it that can blow away. So depending on where your property is on the Cape, it might have been used for grazing, it might have been used for a woodlot, it might have been used for farming, all kinds of different things it could have been used for. So within that varied picture that we got to start with, there are smaller variations that came from how the land was used. And then there's modern building practices. So depending on where your house is and when it was built, you can see that this is a typical house being built on the Cape. Now, all the topsoil is gone. So when they get the building site ready, they remove all the topsoil. Sometimes they put it in a pile and put it back where it was. Other times they may bring something from somewhere else that's completely different. But but they'd have to bring an awful lot to give you a good thickness of topsoil, right? So, you know, if your house was built like this and you have very thin layer of topsoil, that's probably why, right? Also, when you, drive a lot of heavy equipment over the ground, it tends to compact the soil. And, that's not good for it either. So the point of all that, the geologic history and the human history is that you can go a short distance on Cape Cod and your soil can be very different. You can go from the front of your property to the back and it might be quite different. So it's good to pay attention to those small variations and treat your soil accordingly. All right, shifting gears a little bit, we talked about adding organic matter to soil. That's going to help in soil. You go into a garden store, you look online, there are all kinds of things that are advertised to be the best thing ever to add to your plants, right? Bat guano, green sand, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. So how do you know what to add? Well, the best thing is to get a soil test. We go to our physicians once or twice a year and we have a checkup. And what they do a blood test and they listen to our vital signs and they make recommendations based on what they find. So they may tell us to eat more of something, less of something, they may prescribe medications or take us off medications. But it's all based on them testing you. And we should do the same for our soil. Because the same way you don't want to take a medication you don't need or not take one you do need, you don't want to add anything to your soil that it doesn't need. That's just a waste of money among other things. And you don't want to not add something that it does need. And the best way to determine that is with a soil test. I have the info for soil test and I'm going to go over that with you in a minute. Yeah.
So when you send away for the soil test to UMass or wherever you would send it to, do you get the general one or do you get both, the micronutrients and a general soil test? Because they're some of them are quite extended.
Yes, but why don't I hand this out now? And we can talk about what's what. I probably not for everyone, if you want to take one and pass them around. There are two sources for soil tests. You can get a test of pH, which is a measure of acidity from Barnstable County, and that's free. You can also, there's two different things I can. You can also get a test from the soil lab at UMass, which gives you a lot of information, and I think that's what you're referring to. Yeah.
So.
That's not right. So the county soil test is free.
Ready for the other one? Oh, yeah.
Okay, does everyone have two different handouts? Great. The county test you get from the county lab in Bass River, that's carried out by Master Gardeners, and that's just the pH. And I'll talk about what that really means in a second. UMass soil test, they send you a whole page of measurements that, if you're interested in that kind of thing, you might really like to geek out on it, as we say, or nerd out on it. If you're not interested, you can go right to the second page, which is the recommendations. But they will tell you the amounts of all of the major nutrients, the minor nutrients. They'll tell you, if you ask for it, they'll tell you the amount of organic matter in your soil. And they measure things that are actually quite complex, like cation exchange capacity, which affects how resistant your soil is to changes in pH. So they use all that information to make recommendations. So let me go through the next few slides and see if I can clarify that a little bit. So nutrients. Plants need nutrients just like we do. And the big ones for plants are the same ones as they are for people. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. And they each have a different function in the plant. Nitrogen is what makes stems and leaves healthy and green. If your plants are yellow, they probably don't have enough nitrogen. Phosphorus is really important for roots and for flowering. And potassium is involved in the energy system, like the plants, converting sources into energy. But there are also a lot of micronutrients. And if you look at this list of plant micronutrients that I have at the bottom here, and you looked at a daily multivitamin bottle, you're gonna pretty much see the same things. pH is a measure of how acid the soil is. If you remember back to the last time you heard of it was high school science class, so it could be a while. But basically a lower number means something is more acidic. So something like vinegar has a low pH, it's around 4 or something like that. A higher number is less acidic, or what we call base, it's more basic. The reason that's important to plants is that plants' roots down in the ground there are grabbing onto nutrients. And how effectively they can grab them depends on what form the nutrient is in. So nitrogen, for example, can exist in a lot of different forms: ammonium, nitrate, nitrite, lots of different things. And different nutrients are available at different pHs. So that's what this graph is meant to show. At the bottom, you see it goes from 5 to 7.5. Those are pHs. So 5 is fairly acidic. 7 is neutral. And then 7.5 is a little less acidic. And those dark green bars, if you look, for example, the lowest one is zinc. It goes up to 7 and then it stops. And what that means is that if the pH is 7 or below, a plant can get zinc out of the soil. If it's above 7, it can't get zinc out of the soil, even if there's tons of it there. It's the pH affects what form zinc is in and how the plant enzymes work and so forth. If you look at something like sulfur, well, let's look at something like magnesium, it's right up here. You see that if the pH is between 6 and 7, plants can take it out of the soil, but if it's below that or above that, the plants can't get it. And so that shaded green area, if you look at all those individual bars, that's where all of the nutrients are available. So between 6 and 7, if you look at all of the bars, except for calcium, which is a little bit higher, all of those nutrients are available to plants. Now, there are some plants that are different, like for example, blueberries. They're very happy with the pH of 5. They have enzymes that are adapted to that pH. But most of your annual flowers, perennial flowers, definitely vegetables, are going to be happy between 6 and 7. Usually what's recommended is between 6.2 and 6.8. It's what we call slightly acidic. Does that make sense? The pH affects what nutrients the plants can take up. So those 2 sheets I gave you were for soil samples. And if you want to take a soil sample, which I'd highly recommend, there's a specific way you want to do it. So first of all, if you're going to plant vegetables over there, and you're going to plant blueberries over there, take a sample from there and a sample from there, because you've got different purposes and you've got different areas. So that's where I said, different parts of your yard seem to have different soil. Do a test for each area for what you want to grow. But what you want to do is, like, let's say this was going to be our vegetable garden. I'd go around and I'd take maybe 6 or 8 different sub-samples. So I might take one here and I'd walk over here and take another one, walk over here, just randomly. It doesn't have to be a pattern, but just so you're not taking it just in one hole. And what you wanna do is, like in that picture, dig a deep enough hole, if you have a nice straight trowel. Then you wanna kind of scrape the side of the hole from the surface down to 6 or 8 inches. So that you're not just getting the soil on the top or the bottom, you're getting a little bit of a column, like a profile. Just take that, put it in the bucket, go to your next stop, do the same, do that maybe 6 different spots. And then mix the whole thing together. And then air dry it. So just take the soil that you got from those different spots, mix together, spread it out on a paper towel or newspaper or that brown paper packaging type of paper. And just leave it, you know, for as long as you have to, depending on the time of year, and whether or not you have air conditioning and how humid it is, it might take different amounts of time to dry. But you definitely want to air dry. You don't want to put in the oven because that will drive off some of the nutrients. So when it gets dry, you want to remove the big stuff. You know, if there's rocks or sticks, just remove them. Put it in a bag, label it, like I have that one with my last name and bed, that means it was from the raised bed. And you could, well, UMass, you're gonna have to snail mail it, right? You can also mail it if you wanna test at the county, but you can drop it off at the county lab also. What we recommend is if you send it to UMass is that you get the nutrient analysis plus organic matter. Because the organic matter is so important, and we'll tell you about that out of your soil. If you look at that soil form, like if you look at the second page of the UMass form, yes. Okay, there are some codes there. You can look at the code. We didn't get the second page. It's on there. It's one of the top of the. Is there any more back here? Oh, it's up there, yeah. Okay. On the second page, there should be a list of codes. And it says like, should look like this, you know, home lawn was a code. Home vegetable garden was a different code. Home strawberries was a different code. So when you send in your soil sample. Did I give you enough?
Yeah. Okay.
We all good now? When you send in your soil sample, you can list up to 3 codes. So let's say you have a raised bed and you're not sure if you're gonna plant annual flowers, perennial flowers, or blueberries. You can list all 3 of those things. And what you will get back are recommendations for each crop that you listed. So like I said, you'll get back a page of chemistry results, which you may or may not be interested in. But the really important part, the second page, you can see that at the top here, it says recommendations for home brambles maintenance. So this is for a raspberry bed that's been there for a while. And it gives you amounts per 100 square feet. So you have to do a tiny little bit of math, but not much. So like down here, it says to supply nitrogen, supply either 1 or 2 pounds dried blood, and we'll go over this in a sec, or less of urea. That sounds really complicated, but you can buy these things at garden centers. Anything that they recommend, they have at garden centers. And the information on the bags is really useful. It will say 3 cups equals 1 pound. So that if your recommendation was to put a pound of this, you know that that's 3 cups. And 100 square feet is, you know, like 10 by 10. If you do get a soil test, and you're having trouble interpreting the results, then get in touch, go to the Eastham Library when there are people there, or get in touch with the Hort Clinic. And there'll be some master gardeners to help you. Any more questions on that?
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Limestone.
What type would you recommend, pearl limestone or?
They usually recommend, when they say limestone from UMass, they're recommending kind of a standard limestone that takes a while to react. The difference is you would apply the same amount, but, it says here, split the application between, autumn and early spring. But limestone, standard limestone takes a while to do anything, so you could use the same amount, let's say in the fall, or, you know, if it's like March, right before you plant your crops, you might use the fast acting thing. That's a good question. Okay, well, what if you can get around to testing your soil? Life happens, right? We sometimes don't do things we intend to do, or things come up and we don't do it. Well, in that case, you want to use an organic fertilizer, I'll talk about why in a minute, that's designed for your crop. And then it's very important that you follow the instructions. I always have this idea when I have company over that if I'm making food more is better, which is fine if you're having company. If you're feeding your garden, it's not really food. You should add just the right amount of fertilizer, because more is actually not good. More can be bad for the plants, and it can create runoff and pollute our waterways. So adding the recommended amount is important. So if you're growing vegetables, here's a package that you might see. Tomato and vegetable plant food, natural and organic. It has these numbers on it, 8, 4, and 8. And they represent the percents of the 3 major nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. For vegetables, those numbers are usually going to be about like that. They're going to either be the same, like 5, 5, 5, or 10, 10, 10. If you can find one with a lower number in the middle, that's best, because phosphorus is actually in excess in our Cape Cod soils. And it's what runs off and pollutes our freshwater bodies. So if you can avoid adding too much phosphorus, it's good. In fact, if you do get your soil tested, chances are it will come back saying that your phosphorus is excessive. Don't be alarmed by that. They all come back like that if they're from Cape Cod. So here's an example. If you were fertilizing a lawn, look at how different the numbers are. 26, 2, and 11. So for a lawn, you want that leafy green growth, and that's what nitrogen encourages. So that's why the first number is so huge. You're not looking for flowers. So that's why the middle number is small phosphorus. You've got enough there for roots, and you still need some for some potassium. But imagine, you know, putting the wrong one in the wrong place. You're doing something that's really not good for that kind of plant, for what you want. This is a bulb booster. Look at those numbers, 0, 40, 0. So that's all phosphorus. That's gonna encourage root growth of your bulbs, you know, after they flower, and flowers during the flower season. So it's really important to pick the fertilizer that matches your crop and put that in the soil. Why do I say organic? Because of all of that I said before. Organic matter actually feeds your soil. Right, if you look on the right, synthetic fertilizer goes into the soil. When it's moist, it's dissolved and the plants take it up. The plant will be fine, probably, but you're doing nothing for your soil. Whereas if you use organic fertilizer, that adds organic matter to the soil. It helps the microorganism community, and you're feeding over time, it will improve your soil. One thing about organic fertilizers and adding organic matter, that it takes time to break down. So if you're going to use an organic fertilizer, let's say your vegetable garden, you probably want to put it in March. So it's had a couple of months to start being broken down before your plants go in. For anything that you add, you want to broadcast it as evenly as possible. You want to rake it into the top few inches, because you want it to interact with the soil, not just sit on top of it. And then it's a good idea to water it in so that, it gets mixed in and it doesn't blow away. Oh, like I just said, organic matter takes time to add down. So if you're adding compost to your garden, same thing. The fall is a good time to do it, March is a good time to do it. But, if you wait until, it doesn't mean you can't add it later on, but it won't have much impact until a month or two after it's added. So, in summary, if you want healthy plants, you gotta have healthy soil. Healthy soil is a complex of mineral matter, dead organic matter, and many living organisms. Plants are gonna grow best with the right balance of nutrients and pH. That's why it's a good idea to get your soil tested. And actually, this is a good time to get your soil tested because there's nothing growing in it, and because the soil labs are not busy. And then you'll be all set in the spring to add whatever you need to add. If you're using a general purpose fertilizer, make sure it's designed for your plant type, your specific plant type. Recommend to use an organic product and use just the amount they say, because more is definitely better. Add whatever organic matter you can and happy garden. Yeah,
What is your opinion about the bags of dirt that is soil?
Sure, thank you.
They sell at the Home Depot and all the other stores, like the ones Miracle Grow with food built in for the plant for 3 months and.
yeah, it depends on really, your own preference. Like if you're growing annual flowers in a container, that might be a great thing to use because it does have food in it and you're not gonna eat the flowers, so, it's those potting mixes
Right, that's what they are.
are different from soil because there's actually no soil in them. Potting mix is typically like bark mulch, peat moss, things like that, vermiculite, things that are meant to enhance the water holding capacity. And because you're putting it in a pot, you don't actually want to put regular soil in a pot because that doesn't work out well. So if you're going to put something in a pot and grow it, that might be fine. Good question. Growing things in containers is a whole different thing. Yes.
What's your opinion about reconstituting that potting soil or whatever in like my compost pile? And
Oh.
just throw it in there and.
Yeah, that's a great question too. If you have a home compost pile, the rough recommendation is every time you add a certain amount of something that's green, like food waste from the kitchen, you should add 3 times as much brown. So you can use that for the brown for sure. I wouldn't dump the whole season's worth of potting soil in there at once, but if you're layering your green with your potting soil, that's fine. The other thing you can do, depending on what you're growing, like if I'm growing annual flowers in pots, I'll take half used potting soil from the year before and mix it with half new. And, so that it kind of rejuvenates it. After a few years, it just loses its zip, Some things though, I wouldn't do that for, like, if anything that was diseased, like tomatoes pretty much always get tomato blight, so I don't use that potting soil for anything. I don't put it in my compost. That just goes out, or it goes down in the woods or someplace. Yeah. There was yeah.
How about seaweed?
Seaweed, you can use seaweed, I'm not sure how much it's gonna feed your plants. If you have a compost, probably the best thing to do with it is chop it up and put it in your compost. A lot of people use it for mulch, so you put it on the surface of the soil, and mulch is a great thing for, your plants and for your soil, because it keeps it covered, it helps it warm up better. And apparently the salt it's not salty enough that it's a big deal. I think it depends, there's seaweed that is like rockweed, that's kind of slippery and slimy. And then there's eelgrass, which is, so flat. That's probably better if you can get it. The trouble I've had with seaweeds is that it tends to hold on to the water. So if you have things like slugs, they really like it. But if you use it for mulch. Yeah,
I have a tree that's decomposing, an old, maple.
yeah, is it
And-
still standing or is it down?
It's kind of standing.
Okay.
about 50 feet tall.
It's almost down.
And, yeah, but it keeps lopping stuff off,
Yeah,
and it's just very pliable.
yeah,
And if I put that on beds,
if
how
it's,
much is gonna work?
well, if it's broken down so that it looks like the bark mulch you buy in the store, it's kind of wet and you can almost bend it.
Yeah.
Then that would make a good mulch.
Okay.
Um,
Will it have any nutrients?
doesn't have a lot of nutrients, because by the time it gets to that point, it's mostly carbon. You know, what you're left behind is just what the organisms couldn't eat. So I'm not sure I'd mix it into my soil like I would compost, but it might make a really good mulch, just like bark mulch does.
Yeah.
If you add something that's too woody to your soil, like the reason we don't mulch vegetable gardens with wood chips is that, the microorganisms have to take soil out of, nitrogen out of the soil to break it down. But if it's as rotted as you say, it could be pretty good. Yeah,
How do you think of the bulk compost, like from Brewster Sand and Gravel, places like that?
people always ask me that, and I, to be honest, there are people who swear by it. They say they use it all the time. I mean, every town has their own composting facility and they're all different. Something you could do if you were really curious is the UMass lab tests compost. Roberta Clark, who used to be the head of the cooperative extension, tested the compost from Barnstable once a long time ago and found out that it was fine. But, in Falmouth, we have compost that's made mostly just from leaves. And, if you get it, it kind of looks like black sand. So if you really, but every town has different, the hesitation people have is that, if people use chemicals on their lawns, let's say, and then they put grass clippings in, some of those chemicals might not break down. You might not want that, let's say, in your vegetable garden.
How about weed seed? I mean, does it ever get hot enough to actually kill them?
Well, you would think at a town facility it would, because the thing that, the question was about, do we think that the town compost would kill all the weed seeds? In order to kill weed seeds and disease organisms, it has to get hot enough. And the heat depends partly on what you put in, but also on the volume. So like if they have those big mountains of waste, I would guess they're probably hot enough. In fact, the ones in Falmouth have caught fire a few times. They've created so much heat, they started fires.
We have fires in ours, yeah,
Thumbs up, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so, if you're really curious about your own town, I think right there in the UMass, when you fill it out, you have to tell them it's compost. But they'll analyze it for you, and they look for things like lead and things that might be toxic.
I actually haven't tested because I'm using the raised beds because I have no soil. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm on a sand heap, but I've used the town stuff and it has very little water retentive properties.
Yeah.
It's more like black sand.
That's what ours is like in Falmouth. I think
Yes.
they take all that organic matter and they mix a lot of sand into it, so it's like it's compost, but it's diluted with so much sand that, but it's free, right? So
It's pretty.
I send it, send it out through
I'm
that.
gonna do that.
Yeah, and then you wouldn't have to guess and worry and, and then next year when someone asks you a question, you can answer it. Yeah,
Since we're talking about soil, but of course with plants, I'm interested, with animals like moles and stuff that
Yep.
are coming in the lawn. Again, are they in there trying to get nutrients out of the soil, or is there something else that's attracting them?
well, some of it's, they're just making homes.
Yeah.
They're not getting nutrients like plants do, but, they would like to eat the plant's roots
Yeah.
and get the nutrients that way, yeah. But they're, herbivores,
Okay.
yeah.
Is there any tips? Because we've tried different things, but,
Do you like cats?
Okay.
Because cats are good, especially good ball hunters,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
balls are kind of heavy and.
Yeah, we've had it in the past.
They don't
Yeah.
like dogs either.
Pardon?
They're not partial to dogs either.
Okay.
Oh, okay. There are a couple of products, I can't remember what they were, but it's kind of, you kind of have to blast your whole yard with it. Yeah. I don't know what works for them, to be honest. If, you know, if they're eating, I know people who really have a
Well,
problem.
they're doing lawn, so they're just trying to, again, get to the roots
They're
of the
eating
grass.
the roots, or they're eating, if they're, depending on what it is, if it's a grub eating thing, they might be eating grubs, but. Yeah, they make those little tunnels,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they're not
Soft
eating the
spots.
soil. Yeah, right. Yes,
When you mentioned the, not using the soil from your, where you have tomatoes because they can have disease, would you not compost tomato plants then?
correct.
Okay.
Not in the home compost, because it's not gonna get hot enough to kill the blight organism, and one of the ways to minimize the blight getting worse every year is to get rid of all of the spores that would be on your plants and your dropped leaves and dead plants, so it seems like you don't like to do that kind of thing, but I just take it all, I put it in a paper bag, and I put it in the trash can.
Yeah, okay, so anything that really looks like moldy or like.
Yeah,
blight,
anything that if it's got any kind of fungal disease, because they would love your compost.
Yeah,
You know, it's moist and there's nutrients and,
okay,
powdery mildew, any of those things. And the same thing with, your composting, you don't wanna put anything in it that's got seeds on it, that are weed seeds. You know, if it's a early season, it doesn't have seeds yet, fine, but if it's flowered and it's got seeds, you don't wanna put any weed seeds in your compost.
Yeah, I had the most amazing cucumber plant that came out of nowhere, out of my
Out of your
compost.
compost?
Yeah, the ones that I planted, that he did, just one took over the entire garden, climbed over these
Yeah, so,
more beautiful cucumbers than it came out of the compost.
yeah, that's kind of fun, isn't it?
Crazy.
You know, you put cucumbers in there and I got some butternut squash out of my compost. You know, it's just.
I just wanna, make a plug for the, Master Gardeners program that they run over in Harwich.
Okay,
If
but
anybody is really into this, and can't get enough information, sign up for that class. It's either 6 or 8 weeks
it's 8 weeks,
for like $60 or
yeah,
something.
$80 for 8 weeks.
Yeah, it is fantastic.
Yeah,
It's really
good,
fantastic.
good, I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Backyard Horticulture. And, if you look on the green side of that little business card I gave you, it has the address for our website. And, usually we open up registration right after the beginning of the year. And the classes usually fill quickly.
Yeah.
We have space for like 34 in Barnstable, I think, and 50 in Harwich, and it gets filled within a week or so. So,
Yeah.
if you're interested, keep your eye on that and sign up early. It is a great thing. I'm part of the one in Barnstable, and, it's a great pleasure being organized, because I get to listen to all these other master gardeners come and talk about their areas of expertise. Pleasure, probably ready to go. Thank you again for coming. If you have other questions, just hang out and I can stay for a while.
yeah.